go. Second try's a charm. Hello, everybody. Leslie Plazz here. Zazoo Plazz. Just taking a deep breath. Full moon in Leo. I think there's some aspect to Uranus going on, and in opposition we got Leo, full moon in Leo, and all the planets bunched up in Aquarius. They're hovering around my my Lilith and my moon. So we got moon opposing my moon, and it's just a whole bunch of stuff going. We got Pluto, Mercury, Venus, Mars. Did I forget one? Mercury, Venus, well, just everything except Saturn's in the end of Pisces, and Neptune's just moved into Aries. So there's that. But today I'm gonna focus on the Leo Aquarius axis, because I think it's relevant and it's significant. And you know, Aquarius is all about astrology and woo-woo things, and you know, out there, and the community and the collective, and you know, humanitarian causes, and those types of things. Aquarius is the oddball, the visionary, right? The guy standing on the corner, or the lady, or people like me. Oh man, about to backtrack. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here. But, you know, the person who's been standing on the street corner saying the end is near forever, and people ignoring him or her, or on social media, doing my videos here for 5+ years, now 6 years. So yeah, it's going on 6 years I've been doing this. I got 18 followers and I'm still doing it. What does that tell you? I'm getting something out of it. Obviously, I'm not getting paid for this by, you know, this platform. And I've been on Facebook just about as long, doing my page. And what keeps me going is, you know, I've got Aquarius in the 5th house. That's creativity, children. You know, I was gonna have kids. It was destined that I would work with kids, and I taught CCD all those years. Children were going to be an important part of my life. You know, and I mean that as, you know, as a teacher, as a mom, as someone who's never grown up, as a Gen Xer. My inner child is alive and well, and will always be. So that's Aquarius, okay? So just to get going, because you know it's okay. It's still okay. It's about 9 o'clock on Saturday night. You know, I've never done my reports on Saturday night, but you know, I like to. It's 9 degrees outside. I can't go outside. I was going to do my laundry tonight, do the Zazoo report tomorrow. I said, there's ice, there's those, I never remember if it's stalagmites or stalactites, which one goes up from the ground and which one, but there's these long daggers hanging from the building. Stalagmites or whatever. I mean, there's icicles hanging off the back of my car. And it's 9 degrees outside, so I'm not gonna go do my laundry tonight. I figure Monday it's gonna be back up toward the 30s, so Monday I can go do my little errands and do my laundry. Last night I made my pork, Caribbean pork with pineapple and rice and peppers. It's so good, carrots. So I'm gonna have that tonight. So I figure tonight I'll do my Zazoo report and get my grocery list and menu, you know, for the delivery people ready for Monday. So I don't want to force anybody to come out in this kind of weather. It's too cold. I went out yesterday. I covered up every inch of my body. I had my big coat, my boots, heavy socks, just to go to the mailbox. my heavy parka, and then I I wound my scarf around my neck. So all that was visible was and I had sunglasses. So because my eye doctor sent, all this email about, oh, you gotta protect your eyes. So, and I always do. So I had my hat, I felt like the picture of Laura Ingalls Wilder in her books, where she's all bundled up, in the big woods in the winter. She's like this, or the kid in the Christmas Story whose mother bundles him up and he can't lower his arms because he's had too many layers. He walks like this, and they push him over. He falls over. They have to help him up because he can't get up. That's what I looked like. All I had was my mouth and my nose. And by the time I made it to the trash in the mail and one loop around the parking lot, I couldn't feel my face. I had to go in. It was awful. Then we get emails from the place here. The lady, the doom and gloom lady, she's like Debbie Downer, She's like, oh, you must have heard the news. Stay warm and safe. She said, let us know. This is the thing that gets me. She said, you might have heard on the news about homes getting ice dams. Now, before I even knew that, I did a little post on my Facebook page about ice dams. I never knew because somebody spelled it with an N on the end, D-A-M-N. So I had to point that out. So I did a little thing about that because, that's my pet peeve, spelling errors. But it's funny. So, where was I? Yeah. So, and they say what happens is the ice, like the water melts, off the roof because the heat escapes from, through the insulation of the roof, and it melts, and then it turns into ice, and then the water gets all dammed up, and then it can leak into the house. So she says, oh, everybody, tell us. She's like, we'll be off this weekend, but let maintenance know, emergency maintenance know if you see leaks or bubbles in your on your walls. Oh, great. That's not something that's worth paying extra rent for. And I said, well, maybe it won't affect me because I'm on the lower level. And then I go and look, and where my bedroom is, there's like a bump out with a little, like a roof that comes down. And I said, well, if that's gonna leak, it'll leak into my bedroom. Because during the spring last year or summer, we had some extreme rain, and it started coming in through the window. I had to get towels out because my whole bedroom floor was flooded. It's a good thing I had my photos on a table and I had pushed it away from the window, because all that stuff would have gotten ruined, even though I have it in plastic containers, most of them. But I said, wow. Now, I happened to be there at the time that it was coming through the window, so I was able to, block it up. I have my guides working overtime. So I said, okay, what's going to be next? Apparently this time it's Arctic ice dams. So there's that. It's always something over here. Always something in the Zazoo land. You never know what's going to happen. Whether you have, I get technical now. This is the most Aquarius thing ever. Okay, I talked about that. Okay, Zazoo. No, I didn't get to do my laundry. I got to do that one day. I said that already. And I made my pork. Oh yeah. What's the other thing I wanted to talk about? Let's see. It was so good too. Okay. Oh, the ice dams and what else was I going to talk about? Okay. Not that. No, not the, okay. Oh yeah, technical issues. So this is the ultimate. All right. So I have a website, right? And on my back end, it's not letting me in I've had some difficulties off and on, getting into the back end of my website. Because I do a WordPress, I did a WordPress site and back in 2020, 2021. And then I got this separate theme package that I pay for, annually, along with the server fee and the domain fee to, host ZazooPlazz.com. And I learned how to do all this. I know HTML and all this stuff. So I can go in the back end. I don't know JavaScript, though, but I know what it looks like, So I can tell, I can run programs and see what the errors are, right? And I've been beating my head against the wall. Finally, I got in touch with the people, and they got back. I sent them a link. It's one-time link, and they got in. They're like, there's no problem. We got into your site to edit, no problem. And I said, okay, so it's just me. It's just me. The whole rest of the world can see my website and go on there and buy my book and do everything. So it's fine. But I can't. I have to do all these. I have to go way in. There's a back way I can get in through my server hosting platform. But it's not. When I try to go in the normal way, it gives me these like dots, forever green dots. So I reached out for some help, but they're like, there's nothing, there's no JavaScript errors, there's no errors, it's fine. Like, what the heck? So I said, it must just be that I'm in this parallel universe. The rest of the world sees things one way, and I'm seeing them another way. And but the more I try to fight it, obviously I'm just going to have to wait and bide my time until something comes, from the clouds, and literally, and into my thick skull, because the old ways don't work. So there's this, thing where I have to wait. I have this, in human design, I got a report on myself. And the way I'm built is I have to sort of wait with the moon cycles. And things come and they go, and they come and they go. The problems, they come and they go. I can't, I've got to strike that balance between when to use my mind, when to go by my heart, and that's the polarity between Leo, which is heart, and Aquarius, which is the head. There's, some people, if they have strong Aquarius, they live in their mind, and they might have, like, people on social media who are Aquarius. I know people like this. So, they tend to be very mentally oriented. But, they relate to the emotions of the cause of the community, and there can be kind of this group thing going on where the hive mentality, everyone is following them, and they think that this person, is emotionally connected, but what they are is sort of connected on a universal, we're all the same kind of mentality. But that doesn't leave room for an individual, the individual. You've got to balance that with the Leo polarity. Whereas I'm a shining star, I'm unique. I have something special. Whereas in Aquarius, you kind of get lost in social justice, humanitarian causes, and a kind of a cold. It's kind of a cold energy. It's not warm. It's the middle of the winter. It's not a warm. Leo is the middle of the summer, right? So that's the summer sun versus the winter cold. It's very different. So anyway, okay, Zazoo. Right. Okay. Phil Collins' birthday was yesterday. He turned 75. Yeah. So um, I don't know what to believe when, I read things online that, maybe he's been struggling with some health problems. I've seen videos of him where he's singing and he's, still trying to play and make music. But he's got these, I guess he has had some health problems that he's working through. So, but what a treasure he is. I mean, he's got to be, my top three of 80s, 80s, 90s musicians, because he's multi-talented. I just want to, sing his praises and, let's, send some Aquarian love out to Phil Collins, because I'm so grateful that I grew up, as a teenager in the 80s, and so much. I mean, his face was everywhere, though. But the irony was, he wasn't even aware of this, that he was out there so much until later. His producers or his agents or whoever just plastered the radio, it's the record stores, everything. He was everywhere. No Jacket Required. I had all his albums. They were cassettes. I never had an album. I had them all. One I bought in Spain was in '85, No Jacket Required. That was a good one. But I also had Face Value and a couple other ones. I also had a Genesis, Invisible Touch was the one that I bought, with the fingerprint on, the one that they did the video for. I featured this on a lot of Genesis songs on the Zazoo Report. The one with the puppets, where you see Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan. They're in bed, and I saw the news today. Marching feet, and there's water coming in, and it's that one, that video. That was a good one. So anyway, I've been on a Phil Collins kick this weekend. Just wanted to throw that out there. And of course, guess what? Today's song is in that vein. So we'll get there. So you have this guy, Prophet Zephaniah, the first reading. Zephaniah, which means the watchman of the Lord. So you get this image of, kind of like the hermit. I picture it. The hermit tarot card has this old guy, and Aquarius used to be ruled by Saturn. Now it's Uranus, but, it was co-ruled by Saturn. Some astrologers still, think of it that way. It's kind of like the old man, the hermit, and he's just, out there in the cold, in the woods with his light, and he's holding up the light for, to call attention to all the ills of society. But the star in tarot is Aquarius. You notice that a lot of Aquarian, they're either musicians or actors. They tend to be, Leos and Aquarius tend to be in show business a lot. Anybody who has either of those. But Aquarius is more like the quirky, I have my moon in Aquarius. Like John Lennon had his moon in Aquarius too. So they tend to be visionaries, ahead of our time, right? Like we see, like that song, when I was growing up, there was this hippie song, The Age of Aquarius by the Fifth Dimension. And I have sort of eerie memories of hearing that song, being a real little kid in the late 60s, like 3 years old, and that song came on, and it was sort of like, I remember hearing it, while I was playing or doing whatever I was doing, and it was kind of there in the background. And the moon is in the southern house, and Jupiter lights with Mars, that's Aquarius. And love, love peace and peace man. You know, that was the 60s, but I was a baby and a toddler. So I didn't experience it the way some of the older kids did, you know, born either earlier in the 60s, before 65. I'm a Gen X. So, you know, like my cousins who were born in the first part of the 60s, they knew it. They knew it more than I did. I just kind of felt more the vibe. Yeah. If you were born in the early 70s, you don't get it. You might think, you know, I heard people who were born in like around 70 say that the 60s were dirty. Well, I mean, so were the 70s. You know, it was, yeah, maybe, but it was more of a time of, you know, energetically, social unrest. There was a lot going on, you know. It was tumultuous. Yeah. You know, maybe you hear that the hippies were, you know, the unwashed, because they had long hair, and to the, you know, to the conservative, old, you know, authority figures, they seemed, see, because you got that sort of Aquarius, you know, Leo. They were all Pluto and Leo, the hippies, which is, you know, opposite Aquarius. So they were all kind of led by, you know, this idealistic, you know, fervor, this passion. And then once the 60s were over, they're like, you know, it just kind of went away, you know. But those of us who were born during that time, we carry that signature, you know, that energy stamp with us. So, you know, there's more of a quest for authenticity, I would say. You know, we looked at the boomers and said, what happened there? You know, a lot of talk and not a lot of action, right? They became the yuppies, right? Which, you know, in the 80s we looked upon as, you know, those people became our bosses once we got out of college. You know, and they're still holding court. So anyway, so those were the people, you know, who came before, who were, you know, powerful, and they thought they knew everything. You know, they acted like they knew everything, and they had all the money, right? And then we come along like, okay. So those are kind of my thoughts. Oh, Zephaniah. I got a little off track. Okay, Zazoo, get back to it. Okay, so he was the prophet Zephaniah in the days of Josiah. Hosea. I think it's Hosea, king of Judah, around 640, you know, BC. And so he was a guy, you know, standing on the corner, yelling, you know, talking to anyone who would listen about Judgment Day. Repent, the day of the Lord is at hand. Judgment Day. So that the wicked, it would, Judgment Day for those who haven't been acting, you know, who have been for evil, right? Those who have been not minding their, you know, P's and Q's. So the earth would be purged of evil. So he's calling for repentance. So there would be this wiping away, and then a restoration, you know, and hope for those, and God would be merciful toward those who have, you know, who deserved it, who've been all along fighting the good fight, you know, out there speaking truth that other people didn't want to hear. The people who didn't want to hear it, who, you know, shunned those truth tellers. Those are the people who, you know, didn't want the light to shine on their own inadequacies. In other words, that those people reminded them of their lack, their, you know, their character, how, you know, the things that they were shoving under the rug for later, right? And God is saying, now Now you deal with that stuff. Now is the time, right? So seek you, Lord, you humble of earth. So there's this idea that the humble will inherit the earth. You know, those who have cast off, you know, their worldly personas and their worldly, you know, possessions and all that, in favor of seeking truth and being authentic, you know, and serving God, doing their purpose, you know, that God intended for them, right? Which is to, you know, then attract other people who will come along and do the same. So that's the idea. So, you know, we hear, here's the psalm, blessed are the poor in spirit, the kingdom of heaven is theirs. So yeah, we're talking about, the Lord favors the oppressed, the underdog, right? The widow, the fatherless. God will help them. The stranger, the, you know, captive. Whenever you feel that, you know, you're less than somehow in some way, or you know, you're lonely, you're alone, you're cold. You know, those people, right? The ones that nobody wants to acknowledge are really there, right? Or a lot of people don't, right? There are those people who, you know, do see that. But the irony is, and the Song of the Week brings this out, is, you know, that it's ironic, but the rest of the world looks at those oddballs and says, look at them, you know, what a joke. Or, you know, look at their clothes, or, you know, who do they think they are, you know, talking to me like that, me, you know. And so outwardly, this person might not fit in, but the fact is that they have observed, they have what the rest of the world wants in the long run, but they won't admit to themselves that that is the thing worth having. Not all this stuff, not all this prestige and power and fame and, you know, blah, 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 blah. But self-knowledge and connection to the divine, that's what, you know, all this other stuff that people, you know, go after is really, you know, that's what they're really looking for. But they're not satisfied, right? With this guy over here, you know, he's content, and he doesn't have to go and kiss anybody's butt or, you know, work some job he doesn't like. He's the real one who's free, and that's, you know, that's freedom. Aquarians don't like to be tied down. They like freedom, you know, mental freedom. They're not so much like Sagittarius, you know, is more of a roaming kind of traveling, you know, thing. But yeah, Aquarius is more like, don't, you know, don't get in my space. My space. Right. So Paul in the Corinthians says, whoever boasts should boast in the Lord. There's the humility aspect. God chose the foolish, weak, and the lowly of the world to shame the noble, powerful, and wise. Reduce to nothing those who are something in the eyes of the world. So that's good stuff. Rejoice and be glad, your reward will be great in heaven. So Aquarius is future. It's future oriented, right? Present and future, you know, that's way up there. Space, you know, the rocket ship, the space shuttle, that's Aquarius. Anything to do with space, science fiction, they love that. Yeah. So, you know, then we get to the Gospel of Matthew. Like I said, that's the Beatitudes. Jesus goes up on the mountain, and he sees the crowd, so he wants to get away from the crowd. It's Aquarius. He goes up high, you know, and it's an air sign, even though it's the water bearer, right? It's an air sign. Well, that's, air is the mind and thought, talking about concepts and things like that. So he starts teaching his disciples, blessed are they who mourn, they shall be comforted. So the opposite. The poor in spirit will inherit the kingdom. The meek will inherit the land. Those who were persecuted for righteousness' sake will be, or those insulted, for Jesus' name, or falsely accused, will be, rewarded. In other words, exonerated. So, think about today's climate, right? Social climate. Pick an issue, pick an event, pick a news item, anything. This is going on now, right? There are the oppressed, the oppressors, and sometimes it's hard to know who's who. There's this victim. Who's the victim? And sometimes we can, fall into that. Victim mentality is, this always happens to me, or, nobody listens to me, they owe me. So there's that. Okay. So, yeah. So there's that attitude. I taught the Beatitudes to my kids in CCD class. That's one of my favorite readings, I think. So, Song of the Week. Genesis. Man on the corner. So this is not one that I know. I recognize the song, sort of vaguely, because a lot of their songs sound the same. It had a magical keyboard and percussion backing Phil Collins' intense vocal solitude. That's intense vocal solitude. So, you hear this, synth pop, sort of, the synthesizer, and then you hear his voice, and it's always very. He's like the guy out on the soapbox talking, telling you things that are true. He's the town crier. Phil Collins, yeah, man, he's the best. So this came out in 1981 on the Abacab album, written by Phil Collins and sung by, released March 5th, 1982. So I was in high school, my junior year. So this was his first song about the whole, the homeless issue. And then he did another one, Another Day in Paradise, later in the 80s, which was just haunting. I love that song. So this one's about a man, the other one's about a woman. And, it hits you. It kind of, I remember when that song was out, I was working, downtown in the city, and it haunted me because I actually, that song was playing, or it was playing in my head, and I remember hurrying by. It was the winter, and I was going to catch my bus. I was working in the city at some bank. I think it was at the bank. And it was Christmas time, and I had just come from, G Fox was still open, and I think it was late 80s. And I had just bought all kinds of fancy presents, and I was all dressed up with my patent leather boots, and I thought I was, and I felt like, I looked pretty good. And there were people, sitting on the pavement, leaning up against the bus stop, or that I passed by on my way to get the bus, or up against the shelter of the buildings, in the bus shelters, and on people sitting, on the floor in Hartford, and it bothered me, really hit, deep. And then when I worked for the Connecticut Deep, up by the Bushnell Park, people would come up to me, men, women, all different ages, and ask me for money, and sometimes I'd give them something, $1 or two, whatever, and then kind of after a while, I had to be smart because a woman walking alone, sometimes I'd be leaving in weird hours. So I had to be careful, But if it was the middle of the day and there are people around, I'd give them something, you know. But you never know what would happen. But I've always been moved to, but not to make a big deal out of it. It was more of, and what the feeling was though, was that you look into people's, if you're giving, you acknowledge the person and look at them. You see things in their eyes because they've been through it, and they've been through it. And that's why, Phil Collins' songs are so meaningful, because he gets that. He gets that. People don't want to look in those people's eyes because they're by the grace of God, go you and me, you and I, So, because, everybody, I think everybody can kind of relate. Everyone's poor in some way. If you aren't poor, sitting on the street, then, you're poor in spirit, meaning, you don't, you're not connected to God. You don't have faith, right? You're at a loss of, you lose faith and hope, right, for the future. So there's different ways of being poor and wealthy. So I'll just throw that out there. That's my little kernel of wisdom for the day. Take it or leave it. I'm waxing philosophical today. Anyway, I can't go outside. I'm going to freeze my... I don't want to freeze my tip of my nose off, so I think I'll go out on Monday. I got my treadmill here. I can walk on my treadmill. So I'm going to go have my hot chocolate, paleo hot chocolate with coconut milk and my cashew butter rice cake and stuff. And marshmallows in my hot chocolate. So there's that. I am rich indeed. I am. I got everything I need. So, wishing you a great week. Stay warm wherever you are. And I will be back. I will see you. Oh, next week will be my Super Bowl report, because the Patriots are playing in the Super Bowl. New England, go Pats. Okay, just had to put that in there. Yeah, so here we go. Next week will be my Super Bowl report. I'll be here, same place, different time. Take care. Bye-bye.